And you know as well as I do that there are so many things about the family being redefined by our culture. So we want to keep the biblical definition. This is a nationwide partnership. Focus on the Family is an ally, Alliance Defending Freedom. You guys might know of them. Many cases at the Supreme Court they've won. Probably the most noteworthy that you know of is Jack Phillips, the baker in Colorado, who won his case 3 times for having to bake not only a homosexual cake for a homosexual wedding, but also for a transgender wedding, and I believe for a Satanist party. And then Family Research Council, that is Tony Perkins, a national partner. And then all those orange states are where there is a family institute that is protecting liberty and life. So if you live in one of those orange states, reach out to your family institute. So we care about marriage between one man and one woman. That is not a controversial statement. Religious liberty. And the sanctity of life at the beginning of life and at the end of life. So first I want you to know that you're not alone in Massachusetts. And this is really going, I think, to encourage you. There's over 8,000 churches in Massachusetts. Compare that to Iowa, where there's 4,200 churches. Massachusetts is very churched. And I would even go as to say that Massachusetts, with its people, is way more conservative than people think. And the leadership of Massachusetts is indeed woke, but many of the people are not. Here's one of the largest churches in Massachusetts, in Mattapan. This is in Boston, about 5,000 members. Did you guys know there's a 5,000 member church in Boston, right? Evangelical, even though this church is a little woke. This is Ebenezer in Lawrence. This is the mother church of, 120 Hispanic churches just in the city of Lawrence. Did you guys know there were over 100 Hispanic churches in one Massachusetts city? That's pretty cool. This is a 1,000-member church in Lynn. They say Lynn, the city of sin. But we would take issue with that because just down the street, there's another Hispanic church with 2,000 people in the city of Lynn. And these are places that we've spoken. We've spoken in all these places multiple times. This is the Evangelical Free Church in Westfield, another large church out in the western part of our state. This is Full Gospel Church in Westfield again, 800 attendees. This is a Russian, not Orthodox, Russian Pentecostal. Do you guys know there are Russian Pentecostals? Right? I did not know that. But there is a huge Russian Pentecostal population, huge Slavic population in western Massachusetts. This is a group of 4 Hispanic churches in Massachusetts that came together for an event in Marlborough with over 3,000 people in attendance. We spoke there. This is a Hispanic church in Waltham. They've been working with us on several issues. They're starting a learning pod this fall. Very exciting. I'll be talking more about that. This is the Church of the Nazarene in Uxbridge, Massachusetts. Quite a large church, about 500 members in Uxbridge. This is a Catholic church we spoke at in West Roxbury. And yes, MFI is now speaking at Mass for 10 minutes. That's pretty cool, right? I gave 2 mini sermons at 2 Masses so far. So I was pretty pleased with that. Crosslight, this is a Ukrainian church. They redid a Big Y grocery store. This used to be a Big Y, and now it is a Ukrainian church. We've spoken there probably 5 times, and I've been translated into Russian and Ukrainian many times. This is called Legacy, another Ukrainian church in Chicopee, Massachusetts. Another good-sized church, and they've been hosting some really wonderful health freedom. If you guys have ever been to a health freedom conference, they've been doing that as well. This is a church called Lifestream in Hamden, Mass. We've spoken there many times. This is a church called Nueva Vida. We've spoken here 5 times. This is the largest Hispanic church in Worcester, and they are now starting a school in Worcester, a Christian school this fall. This is New Life in Stoneham, a Ugandan church where we've spoken. This is a Hispanic church in Waltham, one of 3 Hispanic churches we've been working with to stop pot shops. There's no pot shops, no recreational marijuana shops in Waltham because of these Hispanic churches. And just to kind of show you what I'm talking about, so these are all the 3 Hispanic churches in Waltham. If you look at the bottom left, that's right before Christmas, where 125 Hispanics came to the city hall to say no to recreational marijuana. And so far, again, there's no pot shops in Waltham. And then this, on the top right, you guys ever heard of like crashing a wedding? So what we did is we got these churches together and we got 100 Hispanic friends of ours to crash a how do I start a pot shop meeting on a Thursday night in the city of Waltham. So they had no idea we were coming, and we just marched, did our peaceful protest, and marched right back into the back. And there were probably 25 people there, and so here you have this group of 100 people. Imagine if tonight 100 people just came and stood in the back. Would that be a little intimidating, right? And so we were able to really make our presence felt there as well. So are you encouraged that you're not alone? I've spoken at about 200 churches in Massachusetts since 2016, and several times at those churches. So the church network is alive and well, and now we're going to talk about how is the local church making a difference for religious liberty. I think you're going to be excited about this. So, church discrimination in Somerville. So the school committee of Somerville told this church called Vida Real, about 1,000 members, that they want to start a Christian school, the first Christian school in Somerville, the only Christian school in Somerville. And so you know what the Somerville School Committee said? Well, you need to meet the standards, the education standards of the public school. You would think that would be an easy standard. Well, you want to see who was actually making these statements? Because a picture does tell 1,000 words. This school committee member said that because the schools are teaching the LGBTQ agenda, that you need to teach the LGBTQ agenda, or we will not start your school. And I don't put this picture up to make fun of anyone, okay? I just say this is what we're dealing with on our school committees, okay? And so this was one of the people on the subcommittee that was discriminating a 1,000-member Hispanic church and saying, you can't start your school unless you teach LGBTQ. So what happened? Well, we represented the church with attorneys from First Liberty. You guys might have heard of them. Kelly Shackelford's their director. And they flew up to Massachusetts, joined the school committee meeting through, actually somewhere on Zoom as well. And the attorney for the school committee said, look, if you guys deny this school, you're going to lose in court should they sue you. And do you think we were going to sue them? You better believe we were going to sue them. And so if your attorney's telling you that you're discriminating, you probably should listen to your attorney. And so they did, and the church ended up winning 8-1 at the school committee meeting, and now they are starting the first Christian school in Somerville. So we have the largest Hispanic church in the largest Hispanic church in the Boston area starting a school this fall, and we have the largest Hispanic church in Worcester, the second largest city in all of New England, starting a Christian school this fall as well. Mask up. Well, that same church, Vida Real, this is their pastor, Luis Morales, and wouldn't you know it, during the 11 o'clock service during COVID, guess who shows up unannounced into his 11 o'clock service? The Board of Health director comes right down the center aisle while Pastor Morales is preaching and says, Pastor Morales, please put your mask on. Not even giving any kind of notice that she was coming. Who came with her but 7 police officers? Can you imagine 7 police officers coming into a Hispanic 11 o'clock service? Do you think that might cause some kind of chaos? And it did. And so what did Pastor Morales do? Well, he got out his phone and he started filming. And that afternoon he called me, and I was on my way home from Springfield. He said, Michael, we need representation. So what did we do? We called First Liberty, another great national partner like Alliance Defending Freedom. They flew 2 attorneys up on Monday. Pastor Morales had better representation at the city council, at the Board of Health, than they did. And wouldn't you know it, they apologized to Pastor Morales for discriminating against him at his 11 o'clock service. You guys probably know the story as well. In 2020, Pastor Casey from Adams Square Baptist Church, he's in the middle there. He sued the governor of Massachusetts, saying, if the liquor store across the street is going to stay open, you better believe it, my doors are going to stay open. He never closed his doors. He was criminally charged 3 times, and after we helped get him representation, he ended up having all charges dropped and kept his doors open the whole time during COVID. It's another great story. Also, these pastors, we had over 500 pastors sign a letter to the governor saying that the church is essential, and that really moved the needle to get churches opened in phase 1 back in May of 2020. This is New Life South Coast in New Bedford, Massachusetts. There's a picture of their pastor. He doesn't always wear a basketball jersey to church, but I thought it was pretty hip. But this is a large church. This is a church that would not normally work with an organization like MFI 5 or 6 years ago, but now they are. And why did we partner with these guys? Well, they renovated a big Shaw's supermarket for their church. And the city of New Bedford said that if you are having a church service, you must have less than 100 people at your service. Now, this is a 1,000-member church in New Bedford. And so they got in touch with us, and we thought, it's ironic that if you go to Shaw's supermarket and shop for bread, there's no limit, but if you want to worship the bread of life in the same building that happens to be a church, all of a sudden you have to have less than 100 people. And so we sued them in federal court. It actually never even had to be heard because the governor knew that they were discriminating. New Bedford knew they were discriminating. And so they dropped the capacity limit. And that is what put churches at no capacity limits in Massachusetts. So every time we supported a church for religious liberty during COVID, we won. And that should tell you something. That even in Massachusetts, that the Constitution still matters, that the law still matters. And if we can win these battles in Massachusetts, I believe we can win them anywhere. So assisted suicide, as Rev Kraft was talking about, is dead, pun intended. So this is a bill in the Massachusetts State House that they wanted to pass this year. Of course, this would make life very difficult for the disabled, for the elderly, very money-driven, so that, young mom, for example, from California who testified in her 40s at the hearing said that she had cancer. She has 4 children. She went to her insurance company, and this is in California where assisted suicide is legal, and said, can I get covered for the chemo that I need? And the insurance company said, no, you can't. Well, what can I get? Well, we'll pay for these pills that will take your life, but at least we'll cover you. And she said, well, what's the copay? And the insurance company said $1.20. So as a mother in her 40s with 4 kids, worth $1.20. And I think we'd all agree, no, at least $1.50, right? No, that we are priceless. We are made in the image of God. And so things like assisted suicide do need to die, and it has. The religious exemption bill in Massachusetts, thankfully, is dead. This is wonderful news. This was sent to study, which means it's dead. Our legislative session ends July 31st, so another week or so. But this was a huge deal. I was at 2 hearings this past year on this particular bill. And I will tell you, 95 to 99% of those that testified, and at one meeting there were 400 people that testified, 400 people at a Massachusetts hearing, that should blow your mind. 99% wanted to preserve the religious exemption for K-12 kids in private and public schools, right? And so this got the most attention of any bill. So like infanticide, assisted suicide, whatever it was, sanctity of religious liberty. Well, this is a religious liberty issue, but this got the most attention, and so we were thrilled that...
Please explain it, I don't understand.
Yeah, so if you're a K-12 in private or public school, you have the ability to have a religious exemption regarding vaccines. This isn't just the COVID vaccine, this could be any vaccine, okay? And so we said freedom of choice would probably be the good thing to do. And by the way, Massachusetts is one of the most vaccinated states in the nation. Not surprising, but that you can still have the freedom to have a religious exemption. We were glad to see choice upheld. Sex ed mandate is in the balance. This will most likely die as well. This is Planned Parenthood wants to monopolize what's taught at your local public school regarding sex ed. And I think we'd all agree that that's not age appropriate, not medically accurate. And so we are excited that the sex ed mandate will also die this legislative session. Victory for the Christian flag. You guys, I'm sure, have talked about this. A somewhat rare 9-0 decision from our Supreme Court that, as I understand it, Boston was making up policy to discriminate against poor Mr. Shirtliff. And it was so egregious that even the super woke justices voted with us on this. So please do come out to the August 3rd event at the Boston City Hall. If you've heard the story, I'm sure you've heard all the details. 284 flags, I think, was the number that flew at the Boston City Hall before Mr. Shirtliff went to try to fly the Christian flag, the Chinese Communist flag, the transgender flag, all these different things. But not the Christian flag. So what are we seeing fallout from this? Interesting. We're seeing some great fallout from this. I don't know if you knew this or not, Mr. Shirtliff, but the town of Reading is now flying just the American flag and the POW flag at the town hall. So that's cool. And I think that's a result of this decision. We're seeing some towns in Vermont even trying to decide how they're going to use this precedent. And I just spoke to a lady from Fitchburg, Massachusetts yesterday that wants to see if she can get all the pride flags taken down at her local school based on the precedent of this as well. And I just talked to a selectman from the town of Kingston on the South Shore, and they are only going to fly the American flag and the POW flag. In Ludlow, Massachusetts, the school is hiding information from parents saying that if Johnny wants to become Jenny at school, that parent 1 and 2 do not get to know, especially if you've decided that they are highly rejecting parents. Or the other term is, are you an askable parent? So to the parents in here, are you an askable parent? If your child wants to change orientation, but you are not askable, well, then you are indeed. But you are indeed prejudiced. Wow, there's something going on, right? I know. So if you are not an askable parent, you are prejudiced. Did you know that? Did you know that? If you drive your car to school and you have a fish on the back of it, you are a highly rejecting parent because your biblical understanding of human sexuality does not jive with that ideology of your local public school. So
Do you have the remote to turn this back on? It should be right there. It's white little...
It's white? Oh, yeah.
Look right at it.
All right.
Turn it back. Put it back.
All right. Man, isn't it interesting when you're talking about orientation, the power goes out? It's like yesterday I was on a Zoom call with the City Council of Worcester, Massachusetts. They were trying to decide whether or not they wanted to discriminate against pregnancy care centers. I'm sure you guys have seen this in the news. And so while this is coming back up, I'm waiting an hour and a half to speak, right? And so finally they say, okay, Michael King, it's your turn to speak. And so they unmute me and all this, Zoom nonsense that we have to deal with now at these hearings. And so I get on and I'm getting to the best part of my speech. and all of a sudden someone calls my cell phone and it mutes my Zoom and it muted me out of the meeting. I was so frustrated. I know. All right, we're coming back. Federal lawsuit in Ludlow. Okay, so you're a parent, you're highly rejecting, you're not askable. Okay, so if Johnny changes his gender identity at school, we're not going to tell you, and that's constitutional. So what did we do? We sued the school committee, we sued the superintendent, and we sued the principal. And it has not yet gone to court, but the principal, without letting anybody know, left town and ended up in Mashpee, Massachusetts on the Cape. And some other interesting things are going on in Ludlow. I think they're switching superintendents, if I'm not mistaken. But this lawsuit will have implications, set precedent for parental rights for the whole nation, should we win this. So the MIAA DEI pledge, if you can tell me what that means, I'll give you $5. Actually, some of you probably know what that means. Yeah, you know what DEI is. But MIAA is Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association. So every student that's in public school, middle school, high school, comes under the MIAA to play sports. So Massachusetts was saying, if you want to play a sport in Massachusetts, you have to sign the DEI pledge, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion pledge. Now this, I think I have a picture of the pledge somewhere in here, but it looks very sterile, okay, when you read it. And so many parents just signed this thing not knowing what they were signing. Now, what were they signing? Well, they had to be okay with basically Leah Thomas being on your girls' swim team. Now, if you know the story of Leah Thomas at the University of Pennsylvania, right, this big guy, right, when he swims against guys, you know what he rates? 500, right, in the nation. But when he swims against girls, what's his rank? Number 1. Girls, does that upset you a little bit? Every girl in here should be upset. Girls, if you want to swim, are you going to get up at 5 o'clock and practice and do all that stuff if you know later you're going to be swimming against Leah Thomas, who's 6'5", has a wingspan of 7 feet, and probably weighs 50, 60, 100 pounds more than you and has more muscle than you? Are you going to want to practice? No, it's discrimination. And so every woman should be upset with this. So our attorneys called the MIAA. We said, this is discrimination. And you know what the MIAA said? You're right, it is. We'll stop doing it. Isn't that amazing? Victory for Life in East Hampton. This is recent. East Hampton wants to follow suit of Somerville. So Somerville just banned pregnancy care centers through legislation from their city council, which is unconstitutional. But in Somerville, there's no pregnancy care center to ban. But in East Hampton, there is. And when they gave the ordinance, when they proposed the ordinance in East Hampton, they had no idea that there was a pregnancy care center in East Hampton. That is ignorant. But they still put this forward, and East Hampton is a city in Massachusetts that's one of the more woke cities. It's a college town. And so Planned Parenthood was planning to go to these cities and towns where they thought it was like a layup, right? That they could get these things passed. Well, wouldn't you know it, the first meeting, 20 pro-lifers showed up. The second meeting, we had 100 people at the meeting. And it was, the police officer there said it was a record number. He's never seen so many people in where? East Hampton, Massachusetts. And so if we can win in East Hampton, I believe we can win anywhere in Massachusetts. And so this was very exciting. For now, they've tabled the discussion. They think we're going to go away, but I just heard from Calvary Baptist Church in East Hampton, where we have spoken, and the secretary of the church said, now we're going to start promoting the city council meetings at church. So that's fantastic, right? So there's a future victory. We're being a little prophetic here tonight. That there's a lawsuit coming in Worcester. Last night I told you I was on this Zoom call with the Worcester City Council, and they want to pass an ordinance. Now get this. Now this is going to blow your mind, but this is how woke and out of touch our city councils are. So they want to pass an ordinance that says to every pregnancy care center that you are committing deceptive advertising practices if you do not offer abortion. Now think about that. What is the mission of the pregnancy care center? To help a pregnant woman come to term, right? To not do abortions. That would be like asking Burger King to sell Kentucky Fried Chicken. They don't do it, right? So last night, the city council voted surprisingly 5-5, so the mayor wanted to be the hero, and he made the final vote that basically put this to the city solicitor to bring an ordinance to the city council meeting in the near future so they can vote on this ordinance. But we know for sure, based on Bachelor versus NIFLA, a case that was already determined by the Supreme Court, that this ordinance in Worcester is a direct contradiction to the ruling in this Supreme Court case. It's even worse than what Becerra and NIFLA was doing. And so we are 110% confident that if they move forward with this, which in some way we want them to do it, because we want to sue them in federal court, because we know that we'll win, because the Supreme Court is a little different, if you haven't noticed, even from 4 years ago, because we just overturned Roe, and now we're dealing with a life issue in Worcester, the second largest city in all of New England. And so we would love to make an example of that city council and Planned Parenthood. And I think that's exactly what we will do. So we're excited about that. So let's stay in Worcester for a little bit. This is, again, the second largest city in Massachusetts, and this is historic and unprecedented. So a year ago, May 2021, the school committee in Worcester defied the will of the people and passed the Rights, Respect, Responsibility, Sex Ed curriculum. No, that's not reading, writing, arithmetic. That is the 3 R's: rights, respect, and responsibility. And so 2 years ago, you know how many kids opted out of sex ed in Worcester 2 years ago? 5 kids, right? How many kids opted out this year? 3,800 kids. And now 30 additional towns and cities in Massachusetts have followed suit, and they want to be the next Worcester in Massachusetts. So we are very excited. There is not only an opt-out of sex ed movement going on in Massachusetts, there's an opt-out of public school going on in Massachusetts. And on that note, we are starting a movement now, it's already going on, of churches starting learning pods, or whatever you want to call it, glorified homeschool co-ops. How many churches do we know of that have space that's not being used during the week? And now we're seeing probably 25, 30 churches now starting learning pods. I mentioned to you the 2 largest Hispanic churches in Massachusetts starting schools in the fall. Okay, so there is a wonderful movement that not many people know about in Massachusetts, where kids are leaving the public school, and where are they now getting taught? In the church. That's great. I think that's great news, and more to come on that, because we're going to continue that into this year. This is, just to let you know, this is that MIAA DEI pledge. If you read number 8 there, this is why so many parents signed this thing, because they had no idea what it meant. But it says, support the diversity, equity, inclusion, sportsmanship, and game officials, committees, policies, programs within the MIAA. So you read that, and you're like, that's not a big deal, right? But that really means that Leah Thomas needs to swim or can swim on your girls' team. So that is no longer mandated in Massachusetts. And just to show you what we've been doing in Worcester, so we've been fighting this fight in Worcester since 2019, since February of 2019, when we initially defeated Planned Parenthood, who wanted to teach their sex ed called Making Proud Choices, and we said this is explicit, this is pornographic, they're redefining abstinence. Their definition of abstinence was, by definition, sexual activity. And so it was just absurd. And the superintendent, after hearing our testimony, said, we're not having Planned Parenthood in Worcester. She was not brought back this year. She was let go because of her stance against Planned Parenthood in Worcester, but good for her for taking a stand. And hopefully she gets picked up in another town or city where they'll respect her. But here's just some pictures from the night there at the school committee meeting. It was packed. A lot of pastors and churches came to that event as well. So be encouraged, right? And what am I saying when I'm saying that we're concerned about this abstinence being redefined, the sex ed in our public schools? I forgot to mention that in Worcester, another great example about how people are not opting out of, not just out of sex ed, but they're opting out of the public school. Did you know in the past 3 years in Worcester, 1,000 students have left the public school in Worcester alone? So why are we so concerned, and why will this continue to be a great movement in Massachusetts? Because do you think the school committee is going to like change their heart on this, change their mind on this? Of course not. They are committed to this. And so that will only make next year's opt-out movement even greater. And so here's what they're doing. They're redefining abstinence. So at the top, you have abstinence as weight. It works 100% of the time. That is biological, right? We'd all agree with that. And abstinence means two things: to abstain, right? It doesn't mean like 35 different terms. But this is also abstinence, this whole other list, including the depot shot, second from the bottom, that a girl of 12 years of age needs parental consent for a Tylenol, but she doesn't need parental consent for a depot shot that can ultimately cause cancer, according to the New England Journal of Medicine. And if you thought that was concerning, you have a whole nother list, including, I won't even go into it because it's a mixed crowd and we'll just move on. But don't send your kid to public school to learn sex ed. That's all I got to say. They'll come home and say, Mom and Dad, you're out of touch regarding your traditional understanding of gender and orientation, and that is true. This is Samuel Brinton. He is the one in your current federal government that is pushing all of this. And so, picture tells 1,000 words. I think you guys should probably run for school committee, run for city council, get involved on the local level or on the state level or even on the federal level. But shouldn't you be in office and not Sam Brinton? Yes. Right? This is how they're redefining gender. I know many of you guys have probably already seen this, but gender-bred person, that your gender identity is separate from your sex. So what you are anatomically is not necessarily what you are gender-wise. That is why when the doctor tries to determine what gender you are at birth, the doctor needs to guess, because gender is a social construct. So how is the doctor supposed to know what you'll choose when you're 5? Gender unicorn, this is taught to 4-year-olds. The spectrum, this is taught in our high schools, and you guys have seen this before, but it's worth repeating to those of you that are new. Our sexuality and gender identity are not set in stone. In fact, people's identities can be fluid. The spectrum can help you visualize how you feel at any given time. Mark how you identify today on each line, but don't feel limited. It's okay to mark something different tomorrow. Is it biological that your gender can change in 24 hours? No. I think that's obvious, right? But this is the crazy world we live in. Be encouraged. These are just some of the towns that are now following in Worcester's footsteps. Woburn, I underscore that because in Woburn we had 2 grandmothers come down to the middle school handing out flyers talking about, again, they're teaching the same curriculum in the high school in Woburn as they're teaching in Worcester, called the 3 R's: rights, respect, responsibility. Well, these 2 grandmothers came down from Salem and one was from Woburn. They spent 2 days handing out flyers. And you know what happened because of those 2 days of activism? The middle school that was going to teach the 3 R's starting in March of last year said, you know what? We've been getting comments from parents from these flyers, and I think we're going to rethink the 3 R's for the middle school. So we were very happy. And what a difference 2 grandmothers can make. Amen? This is a sex education map that we're putting together. We are doing public records requests to every city and town in Massachusetts to find out what they're teaching your kids for sex ed. Why? Because they hide the information from you. If you're familiar with Newburyport, Massachusetts, there was a request made to Newburyport. You know what the first response was? That you have to pay us $45,000 for that information. They did a second request. They said, now you got to pay us $8,700 for that information. So I guess it was on sale the second time around. We said, that's absurd. And so the third time they made their response, they said, you are harassing us. Please stop. And now our attorney is getting involved with the city of Newburyport. Why are so many of our schools so concerned about orientation and gender identity? Because the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE, is the one that's pushing it. And this is the workshop on May 31st. It says, by the end of this session, participants will be able to articulate and use correct LGBTQ terminology, better understand the experience of transgender students and families, be more knowledgeable about policies, practices, and resources that support LGBTQ students, be aware of the research of the factors that promote resilience and positive outcomes, and be more comfortable and confident talking about gender identity, gender expression, and supporting LGBTQ students and their families. It goes on to say that you can actually discipline a student for not using the correct pronouns. That's where we're headed. That's where we are. And so why are so many people leaving the public schools? Well, in Massachusetts, we're seeing 800% growth of homeschooling. Thank you, COVID. Thank you, Massachusetts. The return of the one-room schoolhouse. Start learning pods at your church. I mentioned the 2 biggest Hispanic churches are now starting learning pods. This is going to be a huge movement. We have a church, very large church, suburban church down in Plymouth. They are starting a learning pod this year. They have about 700 people that attend on a weekend, and that is going to make a huge difference in the city of Plymouth. Text the word school option to our short code 87891 if you want more information on school alternatives in Massachusetts. And I'm going to wrap this up. There's more information on our table in the back. You can get a bunch of stuff you see on the screen. Please, if you don't get our text alert or our e-alert, please leave your cell phone, leave your email address, especially if you live in Massachusetts, before you leave. Subscribe to the New Boston Post. I think probably you guys heard all these stories in the Boston Globe recently, right? No. But you will hear them in the New Boston Post. So please subscribe, newbostonpost.com. Text the word CELEBRATE to 87891 to learn more about all the wonderful things. See videos of what's going on in Massachusetts. Text CELEBRATE to 87891. And lastly, if you'd like to support MFI, 2 years ago our budget was $500,000, and the first time ever our budget is now $1 million. So we are super excited about the Lord is blessing us in this mission. And come to our banquet if you want to be around 500 like-minded people on October 14th. Save the date. That's Kelly Shackelford. He is the director of First Liberty, who's been partnering with us in Somerville, for example, to start that school at the Hispanic church. So consider doing that. So guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope you are encouraged. You are not alone, and you are not crazy for having a biblical understanding of the world, even in Massachusetts. Thanks again.